You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Hope you like a little country, some rock and roll and blues, 'cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Richard Leo Johnson. He is one of the most innovative and inspiring acoustic guitarists on the American music scene, and he lives right here in Savannah. Welcome, Richard Leo Johnson.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
A couple years ago, I was just looking through the various things that were going on in town musically. I noticed that over at the Trinity Church, you were going to be performing. And I said, oh my gosh, this is great. Because being a real fan of the Legend of Vernon McAllister. And I went to Jared Hall, who I know very well, and I said, this is really great. You're bringing people from out of town, and I really love Richard Leo Johnson. He said, he lives here in town. I go, wow. That was an absolutely mesmerizing concert. Now, my wife is not as familiar with music as I am, and so she knew nothing. And she came out of that concert just mesmerized.
Well, that's so sweet. It's even more of a treat for me, and I guess any other musicians or artists, if somebody is not familiar with it or the genre or whatever, and they come away with that kind of an effect, it really means even more in some ways, because they don't even know what to think about it, and that's great. I'm really honored about that.
That was the concert. You did a lot of numbers from the album Celeste.
Yeah.
And you had the guitar that you had borrowed.
From Martin. That was the green alien guitar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she saw that, and she gave me this strangest look. I said, wait and listen. And she really loves musicians who do looping and the multi-dimensional and sort of polyphonic effect.
Right.
And so she was absolutely mesmerized.
Well, that guitar it's a kind of a little bit of a story, but I met a guy who knew the guy that built the guitar for the great-great-grandson of C.F. Martin guitars. And the guitar was commissioned by Martin. The guy that built it lived very close to where the Martin Guitar Factory is up in Pennsylvania. And they were friends. And they both had this affinity for alien themes for some strange reason. So the guy that built the guitar, Michael Broley, he got the idea to, of course, create it. There was the upside-down body and put the eyes in it and things like that. And then he got the idea to put a theremin inside the instrument. And the theremin has kind of had a little bit of a comeback. Some people have used it. I mean, even Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page used a theremin every once in a while, and that kind of popularized it. But it was originally built in 20s or 30s or something like that as a serious musical instrument. And there was some people who used it for classical performances and so forth and so on. Anyway, so Michael put the theremin inside the guitar, and everybody's like, now what are we going to do with this thing? Because it's really difficult to play. So I asked my friend to ask Michael Broley if I could borrow the guitar from Martin to see if I could make a recording with it. And he called up Martin, and I sent him a link to some of my stuff, which is kind of out there anyway in some cases. And they were saying, like, yeah, because it's just been sitting in display case at their museum thing. So they sent it to me, and I practiced and rehearsed with it. And then I made a recording, Celeste, based on that. I wound up recording certain parts independently rather than just trying to play it as a live thing, because it's really difficult to do. But the combination of the theremin plus the sound of the acoustic guitar was, to me, just a really great combination of what they thought the future would sound like in the 20s and 30s, plus the acoustic guitar, which is like a visceral, straight up, you touch the strings and you get what you get. And so combining those two things was a hoot for me. So I just kind of created this character based on the legend of Vernon McAllister's influence on people as time went on and he traveled. It's a series of characters that Vernon encountered in his travels, because he was an itinerant guitarist and musician. So the series is Vernon McAllister, Charlie Shue, then there's Celeste, and then there's the newest record I brought for you is two characters. One is a blind Creole street musician from New Orleans. His name is Duval Ray, and he encountered Vernon. And all these people were inspired by Vernon in some way. And then the other one is a Native American who had never seen a guitar, electric guitar in his life, and he thought it was a radio. So that's Roscoe Houndstooth, and that's probably the most out-of-control record I've ever met. Good for a soundtrack for a horror film, maybe. So that's the story about all that stuff and how it works. But getting a new instrument and sort of having sort of a catalyst between the sound of the instrument, the idea of a character, who that character was, how they would approach making music, and that kind of stuff was very intriguing to me. So when I started creating these sort of mythical or fictional characters, it kind of frees you up from how you might have thought about things conventionally, and also how you might have thought about things in terms of you as a performer. Like the ego is gone, kind of. It's really fun. So I've been doing that for quite some time now, and had quit touring, kind of got burned out on being on the road, and then just started making these records at home. And then people started saying, well, would you like to do a show here or there? So if somebody asked me to do it, I'll do it. I had to send the guitar back to Martin because, I kept it probably longer than I should have, but I just really like the challenge of trying to create a new voice, a new perspective on a stringed instrument or something like that. So, and that's kind of where I am right now, just at home, writing songs, like modifying guitars, like this old Mexican 10-string now that I've turned into a baritone guitar with a whammy bar on it, and things like that. Just sort of writing around it, giving yourself certain limitations. I'm limited to the fact that this guitar is pretty brutal, but there's certain tonalities I can get out of it that say I can only play it a certain way. But then again, if I take those restrictions and try to use them as a jumping off point or a sense of inspiration for it, it's fun. It's like playing badminton blindfolded, and every once in a while you hit the whatever right. I know it sounds a little nutty, but because at one point I was just all about technical, playing fast and complicated. Then at a certain point you go like the two-headed cow at the fair is only interesting for a little while.
And that, I think, is the genius. Because to take an instrument that has its limitations, but drawing as much out of those limitations as possible.
Yeah.
I'm always reminded of the story of Keith Jarrett. I
can't believe you even mentioned his name in my presence. It's like, he's like one of the great, great, great geniuses.
Yeah. And I always remember the story of him at the Kuhn concerts, where he came to a piano that was hopelessly out of tune and missing strings, and he created probably the finest jazz album ever.
I know.
On a piano that was
almost unplayable. In a traditional sense. It was like a prepared piano by accident. And he was probably only 31 years old, 30 years old when he did that. I've listened to that record 100 times. I just listen to it and go I cannot believe what I'm hearing from this person. And subsequently, this is funny that you say that. I was watching a video of a Miles Davis concert last night, and Keith Jarrett was playing with him. And he had Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea, and Jack DeJohnette was playing drums. And I was just sitting there listening to this going, one of my introductions to jazz music, oddly enough, was Bitches Brew. Mm-hmm. And so that was my real introduction to jazz, because my friend just happened to have it when I was in high school. I was just mesmerized by that, just absolutely blown away by the openness of it all. So, and in the same way, the instruments that you have and the instruments that you are given, you make so much out of those instruments. Yeah. I mean, things come out of those instruments that you wonder how. Well, one of the things that I did for the Charlie Shue record was every guitar on that record I got off of eBay for $100 or less. And I just kind of reworked them a little bit and used those limitations. I mean, sometimes the strings were like this far off the neck, and I would use it for a slide. I used to do a lot of workshops for Taylor guitars. And all those guitars, they sounded fantastic. They played great. But they all kind of sounded like, not the same, but there was a tonality about them that it had a full range of harmonics and all this kind of thing. And yeah, they were great. But then I started reaching into some of the older guitars that I had. I thought, you know what? This guitar doesn't sound like any other guitar I've ever heard before, because it sounds like it's compressed. It's a singular sound that's not incredible, but it just has a personality all of its own. So I started searching for these kinds of guitars, and I bought a few of them. And that record was based on the idea of using guitars that were virtually, when I got them, kind of unplayable, but at the same time, each one of them had a sort of a personality. And I loved making friends with those guitars in that process.
Well, I know in the Charlie Shue album, it describes the character Junkfish,
Yeah.
who actually plays junk percussion.
Yes.
And so it is interesting to see that indeed they were probably junk guitars too.
Yeah. It's like, well, Greg Bendian is the guy who plays on that with me. He's a really dear old friend. He's an incredible jazz drummer. I mean, and he's just an amazing composer and everything. Early on, he and I did some shows together. And then we got asked to do some shows with Tony Levin, who was a bass player for Peter Gabriel and also a lot of other people. And I did some shows with the California Guitar Trio, and Tony was on the road. So we got to be friends, and he's an incredible musician in every imaginable way. And Greg and I were invited by Tony when he had his band to do some shows as opening for his band. And so Greg and I got to do some of that, and it was fantastic. And then we got asked to do a series of shows with King Crimson, opening for them at a club in Nashville, like for 3 consecutive days. And that's when I got to know Robert Fripp. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so, but Greg and I got to be very close over that. And we've done a lot of shows together. So when I asked him about this record, he was like, sure, I'll do it. He's Armenian, and he's just completely out of control. And so he said, and he started gathering up all these weird things. He came down to Savannah. We made that record in our garage. And he would do things like take a tub of water and use the surface of the water as a percussion device. He did an extended drum solo on our pull-down staircase in our garage. That's playing the springs, and that's called Junkfish Out of Water. We've been talking right now, actually, we're talking about doing some shows in the fall. I did a concert and a photo exhibit at Jack White's place, Third Man Records in Nashville in December. It went over very well, and I had a really, really good time, and it's an amazing situation. The people are incredible. The whole thing, if you don't know about Third Man Records, you should check it out. You know, Jack White, the White Stripes, and so forth and so on. Anyway, so we're thinking about maybe trying to set up a concert there in the fall, maybe, and then doing some other shows. So maybe some more live performances. Of course, do one here in Savannah. But Greg's amazing. I mean, it's just like he's played with Pat Metheny. He is doing the archiving of all of the live performances from the Bottom Line in New York, which is a legendary club, and they recorded every single show that was ever done there for over like 30 years. He's been sending me CDs that they're putting together of those live performances. Like, he sent me a copy of the only live performance of Tony Orlando and Dawn. He's a great guy, though. And he also teaches at Yale part-time. He's doing really, really well. But he still loves to do his live shows.
Tonight we have Richard Leo Johnson. Do you have a song that you think reflects the album Celeste?
I would say Celestial Roundup. It's the first song on the CD, and it was the first song that I wrote, and I still perform that one live.
Why do you think Celestial Roundup, for instance, is a song that is reflective of that album?
It's melodic, it's upbeat, but it's not necessarily indicative of the whole record. It's kind of upbeat and uplifting, and it feels like it's carrying itself. It's sustaining itself through the course of the entire song in a way that almost like has a sense of inertia about it. And that's one of the things I like about that. It's fun. It's just kind of like, and when I play it live, I've kind of changed it a bit. But I just like the flow, and I like the way it begins, and I like the way it ends. It starts off kind of like more of a sort of a percussive thing like that than the melodica. I really do like that. And the other one on that record that I have gotten a lot of response from, it's called Swoon. And a lot of people seem to have responded to that. And Swoon is just like this very emotional, slow, but dramatic, very dramatic. And it changes tempo in the middle of the song. Celestial Roundup is a straight tempo piece like that. More reminiscent of my older stuff, I guess.
And why do you think audiences really like Swoon?
I think because it's just one of those things. It's symphonic. It's a little bit more complex. It has some changes in it. I think that because of traditionally when people would listen to my music, before Vernon McAllister, it was always like very aggressive and technical. And then when I started kind of being a little bit more introspective about composition, there's this thoughtfulness to it and kind of lets people take their own interpretation of it. Like it's almost like cinematic. And that's why Vernon was so popular. The people who do listen to it would say, wait a minute, this is the guy that used to just play 90 to nothing, and all of a sudden there's this old steel body guitar that reminds people of things. I've actually heard people say that they close their eyes and they listen to something like with Vernon, and they go like, I can visualize certain things in my own personal history in life. And it kind of draws things out of people. If you're playing too rapidly and too technically sometimes, you're just overwhelmed by just listening to that. And at a certain point, to me, it's like, okay, I've done that. I've been told, yeah, you're amazing, blah, blah, blah. And I go like, where does that really get you in the long run? I thought to myself, you get the one-trick pony kind of thing sometimes, and it can be dangerous.
You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
If you enjoy our programming on WRUULP, please support the station with a donation. As an individual, you can give any amount, become a basic station member, or become a serious fan of the station. To check out membership rates and to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Again, to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUULP.
The Savannah Bicycle Campaign has published a free cycling guide and map. The Bike SAV map contains downtown and county-wide maps, tips for safe cycling, and overview of state and local laws relevant to bicycling. The guides are available at local bike stores and other businesses, at City Hall, and online at bicyclecampaign.org/routes. Print copies available by emailing info@bicyclecampaign.org. You're listening to music local and sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Richard Leo Johnson. There's two things I really love about your music. One is that each album is a whole new experience.
You're very sweet to say that, yes.
And it's a whole new revelation. Mm-hmm. One thing that drives me up a wall is when fans of pop stars, when they change their style,
they go nuts.
Album,
they say,
what
happened? What happened? I know.
Yeah. That is one thing I love, is when people change and each new album is a whole new experience.
For the record companies, if you change too much and you change direction, they're going to go like, how are we going to market this? Because Norah Jones, when I was with Blue Note, the guy that recorded my second record for Blue Note, his name is Jay Newland, and he had just done the demo for Norah. And we were recording my thing. He said, you got to hear this. This girl's like, it's Ravi Shankar's daughter, and she's like this soulful kind of ballad singer like that. They paid for her to do a demo, and he played it for me. It's like, my God, that's really beautiful. And he says, I don't know what's going to happen with it. And the next thing you know, they threw a ton of money at her production for her first album. They decided to go ahead and make the record and sign her. And they paid some producer a lot of money to make this record. And when they came back with the record, the heads of A&R and everybody else were like, wait a minute, this doesn't appeal to me nearly as much as the simplicity of the demo, which was just a live-to-tape, piano, drums, guitar, bass, that kind of thing. And so they basically resurrected the demo, and the majority of the first album that she did was that. So that was her voice that was created based on the simplicity, honesty, and directness of that first recording. And I was at this party with my friend Jay. We were invited to an after party in New York after Norah did a show somewhere. Her first record sold more than the entire 60-year collection of Blue Note records. That first record sold more than all of them. I'm talking about Miles Davis, John Coltrane, you name it. I was talking to some of the guys from Blue Note. I said, so you guys must be so excited. And so this one guy I was talking to was like vice president. He said, no, we're freaked out. We're totally scared to death. He said, what are we going to do? we have to make a second record and a third record, and they have to be as successful or more successful than the first one. How are you going to do that? It was an anomaly. So that's the record industry for you.
You'd think I'm just a ball of anger over here. The other thing that drives me crazy is the concept of the sophomore slump.
Yeah, I know.
That's based on dollars.
Sure it is.
That's not based on quality of the music.
Or talent or anything
Or
else.
talent or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been in a business where I didn't have to sell something, and so I guess I understand that if you have to sell something, you want something to sell.
Sure. Back in the day when I was talking to my daughter, she started collecting vinyl, of course. She said my favorite records are the ones that were made in the early Jimi Hendrix and Joni Mitchell and some of these things that were just like iconic. And they marketed this stuff brilliantly for Christmas. And like the Beatles always had a new record right before Christmas. But there was so few things to really choose from at that point in terms. And all of them were good and tastefully and well done and stuff like that. But they weren't just clogged up with a million variations on a particular genre. And the people who sustained that and went further with it, it's just a handful of people. Either they died or they just kind of went on and just followed their own thing, like Dylan and stuff like that. I just go, well, honey, you just pay close attention to those earlier recordings like that, because when things become iconic, they're iconic in many ways for a legitimate reason. But anyway, it's a strange business. And I tell you, when the digital stuff came down, my first recording that I did for Blue Note was like right at the point when things were being robbed and pirated and stolen, and it was like the onslaught of the digital copying. Record sales were in the tank. It was just terrible. And I toured 150 shows a year and trying to do everything I could solo, just as a soloist. And it's still hard to come out of it thinking this is worth doing, because I'm wiring money from the road and stuff like that, and I had sponsorship. But still, either you're on the road all the time and you're breaking even or making a little bit of money, and it's like, I can't do this forever. I mean, I had a bit of a breakdown about it because I was missing our daughter growing up. And it's an old story. I'm just not as married to the idea of being an artist performer. That wasn't my goal. I wanted to make interesting music. And sometimes you get on the road all the time and you never wind up not writing any new material for like a 2-year period, because I was on the road trying to keep up with all that. Anticipation, what people expect of you, and so forth.
As I said, I've always been amazed by the combination of instruments that you use. Mm-hmm. So when you showed up with a guitar that had a theremin built in, that didn't surprise me. I think of you as a 6-string, 12-string, 10-string, 18-string guitarist, and with as many tunings as one can imagine.
Yeah. And like right now, this 12-string over here that I have, and I played 12-string early on. I don't know what it was. I just really liked the idea of a 12-string. And at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of 12-string players. I mean, there was Roger McGuinn with the Byrds, then I heard Leo Kottke, and that sort of messed me up for a long time. But I love the quality of the tone of it. It was like all these overtones and stuff like that. So typically a 12-string is this note here and the one right above it, which would typically be an octave. They would be the same note, right? But I dabble with the idea of them being different notes. So I did that with all the strings. Like this is the lowest string. And this is the next one. And this is the next one. And this one. So you get kind of I'd say it's like a little bit scary. I mean, it's like when you start... And you get this really spooky kind of... And so, and little things like... find out ways to make the guitar sound like other instruments. Like this kind of sounds like a snare drum. So I've looped that. That's just one of the things that, with a guitar tuned like this, I'm really a big fan of dissonance, huge fan of Stravinsky and Schoenberg and things like that. So as far as the looping thing is concerned, let's just say, for example, I've got that kind of thing. It's very percussive. There's not a lot of melodic stuff going on. And that way, if it's not limiting me to what I can add to it, it doesn't get too harmonically dense, you know. I can do that and allow that to be a foundation for you.
It's really interesting with the looping because it allows you to sound almost like a full band.
Yeah.
Just as a soloist sitting up there.
Yeah. The looping kind of was a later thing for me, but at one point I started incorporating it into. I had a manager one time, and she said, "Don't loop. If you loop, they won't believe anything else that you do."
As in the recordings?
No, in a live performance.
In a live performance?
Yes, she said, "Don't do it." I was doing a festival that was like kind of a jazz festival thing, and she said, "I would suggest that you just play the way that you have played for all these years and don't loop anything." Because she said, for this particular audience, she said, if you do that, then they're going to say, when you're not looping, they're not going to understand if it's live or not. And she wanted people to go like, oh, you can do that without any extra effects and stuff like that. So I did that for her a couple of times like that, and it was fine. You know, it was fine. But the looping thing has now become like single note people going, can I just make up something? So basically, there's a lot of things you can do with that. Basically, what I was doing is very, 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 very simple. And so I think that part of it is that you can kind of get, don't get me wrong, I like things that are not complicated too. But compositionally, you can get very, very caught up with the idea of it being sort of like just a mood thing. Like that. And you could use that as a background for other things, but for me it's like the idea of using the looping device as a compositional tool, but I don't want it to dictate the process. So like the first thing that I did, that's sort of like you have a drummer sitting next to you and they're just doing a little riff like that.
Yeah, on the snare.
And then the other, but that's not going to be popular in a restaurant. It's like, so you have to develop your skill level to a point where you can express yourself without hesitation. And sometimes you just want to play 3 chords. And you can write a song and play 3 chords, and it can be very, very, very profound. And then on the other hand, you have people like John McLaughlin, people like that. It's like all the time. So his skill level is unbelievable. But that suits his temperament, and that suits his desires, and that's what he wants to do with his music, and that's the most important thing. He's being totally honest.
It's interesting because you approach the looping in very different ways, but you always tend to build from a foundation.
Yes, yes.
For instance, the first example you used was a sort of a percussive effect.
Right.
And you used just the percussive effect as the bass.
Yep.
And you played melodies and harmonies around that percussive bass.
And that's why I think in some cases that if you create too many harmonies and like this, it's already established something in your head. And I can build on that, but at the same time, it's already kind of determined something, dictated something for the song itself. So, yeah, I mean, the looping is a tool. When I record in the studio, I overtrack some things, like the Vernon record was, in some cases, many, many layers of things, but it was mostly just ways to condition the song. I guess that might have been my introduction to looping in a way, is using multi-track recording to the effect of using it as a compositional tool.
The fact that electronics are such now that you can almost do a very highly produced album as a live performance.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Like the fellow that I played with out at the Tybee Theater. Really sweet. His whole thing was like creating, how can I say, it was like he was scoring music in real time with that. Beyond my pay grade, it was like pretty remarkable. I make up all these tunings, and so I use those as a more visceral, I should say. as opposed to electronic. Never owned really an electric guitar. I had one or two, but I never played in a band, that kind of stuff. So the acoustic guitar is I can take it anywhere I wanted to. I didn't have to have an amplifier. So that was a thing I liked about the acoustic guitar. And so whatever you put into it, that's what you got. And when I first saw Leo Kottke, it was the same kind of deal. It's like, oh, God. It was back in the 70s. Like, my God, how could one person make that much racket? And that was a 12-string, of course, for the most part. Leo's an amazing guy. He still plays and still does his thing. He's quite a character. Fahey, of course, John Fahey.
Yeah.
In the beginning.
Tonight we have Richard Leo Johnson in the studio. When I sort of became inspired by Richard Leo Johnson and was looking back at some of your influences, and I said, oh, well, okay, now I know why I like Richard Leo Johnson, because I saw things like John McLaughlin, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I saw things like Ralph Townes from the band
Ralph
Oregon.
Towner, yeah.
I saw things like Leo Kottke. It was back in like the 70s that I was playing that when I was on the radio, actually.
Oh.
And people were looking at me really strange and saying, why are you playing that when there's all these other great things like Aerosmith? And so it wasn't surprising to say, these were it seemed to be some of your influences as well.
Well, I also liked Pete Townsend was one of my superheroes. I love Pete Townsend's power and poetry. I don't know what it was. I was really drawn to mostly instrumental music. There's a couple of people that you might really be interested in hearing, too. A guy who passed away several years ago now, Robbie Basho, played sort of like a raga-esque kind of thing. He was with Fahey's record label, Tacoma, back in the day. I was living in San Rafael, California for a short period of time, and I saw in the newspaper, like, Robbie Basho is going to be playing at this club in Berkeley. And I thought, oh, my God, I can't believe it. I get to go see Robbie Basho live. And it's funny how we pick heroes, or we pick individuals, or as like hold them up on a pedestal, like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And I can't believe everybody else in the universe doesn't feel the same way about it. So my buddy and I went down to the club, which is this small club in Berkeley, and this is probably in, I think, 75. I was playing the guitar on the street, and so we got there and there's nobody there. Just Robbie and his friend. So it was me and my buddy and Robbie and his guitar friend, and that was the show. That was it. And I was like, where is everybody? It should be like a Beatles concert to me, because I was so intrigued with that whole thing. And so we got to basically have a private concert from one of my all-time heroes. And he was complaining about his Mexican 12-string that wouldn't stay in tune. I guess it's an introduction to my guitar that won't stay in tune over here, the Mexican 10-string. But anyway, I'll never forget that. That was an amazing experience. And I thought, kind of drove the point home, is like, are you delusional, or are you appreciating something independently? And this is way before the internets and all that stuff. I loved it. I just loved it on a personal level, period. And I thought to myself, that's all that really matters in terms of artistry and music and appreciation. Just like your buddy saying at your radio show, like, why are you playing that when you have Aerosmith? It's because I don't like Aerosmith. I don't like when you have to try to force people into liking something. It's tough. It's really tough. Like, I'll play some Bill Frisell stuff that's really out. Like my wife, she likes some of Bill Frisell, but some of it she goes like, oh, yikes. What's that all about? It's all personal, very personal. Yeah. Thank goodness it is.
Yeah. And sometimes it just so sticks with you that you have to carry it with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone through the vinyl version of Music from Another Present Era. I had then the CD, and now I have it digital. And so, I mean, Oregon has stuck with me from the early 70s all the way through. And I can name other artists the same way. So as I've gone through collections, because, in a move here, I've finally got rid of all my vinyl. Then in another move, we moved to an 850 square foot condo. And in that move, I started really paring back CDs and going more into digital. just because of space, but it's fortunate that the music environment has allowed me to do that.
Oh, yeah.
And I really, really feel blessed that indeed we have a music environment that does allow me to do that.
Well, you know, it's funny because this friend of mine is a critic, and his name is Anil Prasad. And I said, I'm thinking about doing a vinyl record. I was going to send him a copy. He said, why? He's real critical of this overblown fascination with vinyl. And one of his things he says is that it really does limit artists without a lot of financial support to make a recording. He said vinyl is sort of stands in the way of some people actually making recordings. And I said, oh. And he said, besides, it's all about content. I don't care if it's an MP3, whatever. I mean, it's the bottom line. This is all about the content of the recording and the performance. And you can't disguise a bad performance and bad content with vinyl. Like you say, consolidating those things into a format where you can like draw from thousands of sources without having to physically drag stuff around and romanticize the idea of how music's being played in your home.
And the advantage of digital is that you can take it anywhere.
Yes, exactly.
Although I will admit, frankly, I confess that I do not listen to your music in my car.
Because it'll make you have a wreck.
Well, actually, more likely, I'm driving down to Richmond Hill, listening to your music in the car, and when I see the sign, "Welcome to Florida,"
oh, God.
Because to me, your music is totally immersive.
You're very sweet.
And when you get into that, when you get into the music, you lose all track of time.
Well, you know, when I was on the road a lot, I got introduced to books on tape because I was driving by myself all the time. And I couldn't listen to music because most songs are like 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 6 minutes. And I was like, it makes me think about time too much. So I started listening to like books on tape, and I'll be listening to Dostoevsky or whatever like that, and driving through the mountains of West Virginia. And the next thing I know, it's like I get to the crazy hotel where I'm staying at, and I'll sit in the parking lot for like till the chapter ends, you know, because I'm intrigued with the story. But similar. But listening to music for me it was always kind of tough driving because it's just like I said, an album lasts an hour and a half or an hour or 45 minutes, and it makes you think about time and how much you're driving and how much time you're spending. But that's flattering that you said that. You could have made it to Cuba if you had all the records.
Well, I do have to bring up, again, Vernon McAllister, even though that's a few years ago.
Did you know I got contacted by his relatives? The guy who actually owned the guitar that carved his name into the instrument. And somebody contacted the record company, which is Cuneiform Records, that released that for me. And they said, this is insane. They said, we were doing a Google search for our grandfather who died. And they said, they started trying to find something for his epitaph or whatever. And they said, we were doing a Google search, and they said, everything that came up about our Vernon McAllister was about this record. And they were going like, well, what is this? You know, so they look at it, and that they read some more about it, and they said, that was his guitar. That was his guitar when he was younger. And we never knew what happened to the guitar. Somebody sold it. Who knows where it came from. But I got it from my neighbor down the street who bought it from Randy Woods, who had it in his shop. And Randy didn't know anything about it. But anyway, they were like, oh, my God. And they bought the record. They listened to it at like Christmas or something like that. And I was like, oh, my God, I can't believe this is such an incredible coincidence. So I said, I really hope this doesn't offend anybody, because my story about who I thought Vernon would have been and this whole thing, he's not a very good person. He left his family behind and went off on the road. Well, he was the maintenance director for University of South Carolina at such and such, and that was what he did most of his life. He was just a sweet guy that just had this gig, and so we talked about it and everything, and they wrote me this sweet letter, and I was like, it's funny, because you think somebody, you've done all this research, you can't find anything out about him, and then about 3 or 4 years later, you get contacted by this person's relatives. Anyway, that was a fun coincidence.
Yeah, wow. And so the guitar that you got had his name on the inside.
Yeah, he had carved it in the body of the guitar. It was a metal body guitar, so it's just like with a penknife or something. It's like, said Vernon McAllister, and I just thought, who is this guy? He obviously loved the guitar. He carved his name in it, And it was just a really old 1930s National Duolian. It's the cheapest guitar that they made back in the 30s. It cost like $25. It's an all-metal body guitar with a wooden neck. And I said, well, screw it. I'm just going to make a song cycle about this and kind of create this character. I made it at home with a $90 microphone, with one microphone, and it got more good press than anything else I ever did. It was, I was like blown away. That's why I'm saying you don't have to have a lot of fancy equipment. And the guy that did the final engineering on the record teaches at a college in Massachusetts. And he uses that record as an example to all of his students. He does sound design. He said, you don't have to have this, and this. This is made with baby Pro Tools with a $90 microphone, but just listen to the music. And I was flattered that he cared, but it was it's like one of those things, it's like you don't really have to. One of my favorite records back in the day was Bruce Springsteen made this record called Nebraska. Mm-hmm. It's just made with a multi-track cassette recorder. That's a great record. Field recordings. I love field recordings.
And again, many of the albums, and I'll use Celeste as an example, you sort of get into the sense of the feeling and it immerses you for a while.
Yeah.
And however, Vernon McAllister is little vignettes.
Yeah. There's little short songs that are blend into one another. Yeah. Yeah. There's no real long pieces of music on that. There's one that's a little bit longer, but I'm a big fan of E.E. Cummings poetry and things like that, and haiku and so forth. And I thought this lends itself to those kinds of things.
Well, I'm having such a wonderful time talking to Richard Leo Johnson, so I think I'm going to extend this for another week. We will have him back again next week. This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.